Welcome to the Arlington County Transportation Commission. It is the October 1st, 2020 meeting. I'll turn it over to our chair.
Welcome, and great to have everybody on this lovely fall October evening. Let's go ahead and get started with the agenda, Mr. Best.
Item 1 is citizen comment on matters not on the agenda, and we do have one speaker, Kevin Vincent. Mr. Vincent, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Kevin Vincent, and I'm a member of the Arlington's Environment and Energy Conservation Commission, E2C2, and John Bloom, the E2C2 chair, asked me if I would serve as the liaison with the Transportation Commission, and that's because I joined E2C2 to handle transportation issues. I've got a special interest in vehicle electrification, which have a lot of issues on E2C2. And I know it's of interest to the Transportation Commission as well. And my background is very extensive in transportation, including a stint for 5 years in the Obama administration as the chief counsel of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. So, and I've been dealing with in the EV and the automated vehicle industry. I've been advising them since leaving NHTSA. So I know you have interest in some of those issues, and feel free to call me if I could be of any help. But I'm here mostly to listen and to be a liaison between the commissions. Thank you.
Fantastic, Mr. Vincent. Thanks for coming by tonight and introducing yourself. It's great to have this connection with E2C2, who we often have similar interests to, but very rarely have the opportunity to coordinate. I'm sure we'll be in touch, especially with the upcoming ART bus maintenance facility and storage facility, where electrification and electrification infrastructure is certainly on everybody's mind.
Our next item is item 2. This is Arlington Public Schools and Transportation Demand Management. Melissa McMahon is here from DOT staff.
Hello, everybody. I'm just showing my face to say hi. I'm going to start a presentation shortly. It's very short for those of you who may or may not remember me in previous visits. I also want to take just a moment to let folks know we have two guests, my partners in crime on this project, Kristen Haldeman and Jeff Chambers from APS. So they're here with us right now, but they will happily answer questions and may chime in as we, there we go, hi, as we proceed through the conversation. So I'm gonna share my screen. Everyone can see that okay? All right.
Yes.
Terrific. So Kristen and Jeff and I have been working for several months now on essentially a comprehensive revamp of the use permit conditions associated with transportation demand management and bike parking for APS's school use permits. And before I get into the meat of what we've been doing together, I just want to double check for this audience. Does anyone need a 101 on what the use permits are as they apply to schools, or is everyone on the Transportation Commission totally comfortable with that?
Why don't you do a quick 101? We've certainly approved our fair share of use permits, but I certainly wouldn't say I even fully understand all of the nuances it relates to older schools that are, not newly built.
Yeah, I would be appreciated as well.
I agree.
Great. And so I may, I'll start this off, and Jeff may actually chime in a little bit from his perspective, because he works specifically on the schools as construction projects. But essentially, and if there's any questions you all have that Jeff nor I can answer properly, we also, a team member, Kevin Lamb with CPHD, is helping usher this through a process, and certainly CPHD can assist us with answering further questions you have after the fact. But basically, the use permits are schools are the special exception approval tool that's used for school projects for the purposes of transportation demand management. It runs in parallel to how we do site plan approvals for buildings, where they have these condition sets that go along with the construction and then the life of that building. And so a use permit condition set, much like a site plan condition set, contains lots of different topic areas in it. It covers environmental related elements. It covers the construction process. It covers permitting. Sometimes it covers community meetings that are required, transportation elements like TDM, but also parking and other concepts. So there's lots of different. It's a very interdisciplinary set of conditions with staff working on it from lots of different angles. As far as schools are concerned and TDM, the use permits, originally the TDM element was essentially a reference to a letter between schools and a county staff person. And those agreements were a riff off of the private sector development version of TDM that we do, and that has also evolved today. So schools, like individual development projects, each have their own use permit set, and they each came along and had their own set of TDM conditions that went along with it. And so the TDM conditions over time would change from school to school. So what the schools ended up having was a sequence of several schools, all with TDM and bike parking conditions, but none of them quite the same, and many of them geared with language that was geared more toward what works for an office building or a residential building than necessarily a school or a school system. Is that a good baseline of understanding the use permit process? Are there any other specific questions about use permits that I don't know, Jeff, if you want to chime in for a second and talk any more about how use permits work for schools?
Sure. I think with reference to the TDM requirements, I think that we worked through them with every new project, and we tried to be current with what we were doing. So as we noted, a lot of them are different. Some are very short and have very little information. Some actually tell us what the compensation should be for people that have incentives, which we really can't do because the board sets that, we don't set that. So we've been having conflicts with that. Also, with regard to our reporting methods, they're different for every building. We can't keep track of them. So essentially, we wanted to make sure that we were consistent. In addition, where we put relocatables, et cetera, there are some use permit conditions that are put in, and there's TDM requirements, and they're all different, and they focus mainly on bikes and some of those things. So what we have essentially done, and we'll get into this, is we've created two forms. One is a long version, one's a short version. Long version will cover all the major projects. Eventually, all schools will have the longer version. But where we just have relocatables, we've just defined what the TDM requirements would be, and that's what we're calling the short version. But basically, what we're really trying to do is make sure that we have information that will be for every school that's got the use permit TDM conditions consistent, number one, and number two, provides valuable information that we can utilize to actually make change or incentivize people to take alternate modes of transportation. So we feel that this is the best way to do it, and essentially what we're looking to do is unilaterally do it to all use permits and TDM conditions that we are carrying by the board to make that action so that we can do that. And also we took out references to requirements that no longer exist, or names have changed, or those types of things. So we've really tried to make it so that it will be more universal in the future, and we won't have to go back and change things. We referenced, the bits and pieces that we should be referencing, and even if the names of what those items are, the intent would remain the same. So I think that pretty much covers that, unless you have any additional questions.
I think that's great.
Great. I'll continue with our few slides, and then yeah, not a lot of slides, and then we can just have a conversation if you guys have questions about the material. So Jeff hit on some of these things. Some of the main purposes for these changes are treating APS facilities in a unified way, because it is a system and it's run, all the buildings are run together. The people who staff them are employees of the same employer. So we wanted to really acknowledge that and build a TDM requirement off of that premise. We're eliminating old language that can't be implemented. And there's just some artifacts of previous versions of the TDM language that have been very difficult because of the lack of control that doesn't really exist school by school, but is managed at the superintendent level or school board level. And aligning language better with how schools actually work and how they are different than offices or residential buildings. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about some of the specific changes. And ultimately, this is to get better compliance from the county side, a perspective, I guess, is the compliance perspective, and better performance. We want the TDM programs to work as well as they can. And we think that this is going to be a good step on that on the way. So the main areas of revision and what we sent ahead a few days ago were the short set, the new short set, and the new long set that Jeff described, and a table of the schools to which we would apply those sets. And so I'll talk about that briefly. As he described, the short set is for schools that are essentially not new construction projects, and they may have, whether it be relocatables or it be minor renovation kind of things to make the school last longer. They don't have a big capital budget, so they're not starting off with a lot of money. They have an existing operating budget that can't be ramped up to a really high level. So the conditions condensed for those schools are intended to be ones that are manageable within the operations budget, and ones that are something that can be just folded into the way staff run their business at the school, essentially. And the long set has more of an emphasis on things that might cost more money associated with getting them done initially. And that would include, for instance, interior bike parking and shower and locker facilities for staff and that kind of thing. Refining the role of the site transportation coordinator. For those of you who are familiar with site plan approvals in those buildings, they can call those property transportation coordinators. For schools, they tend to be school transportation coordinators, but essentially this person is that on-site knowledgeable one that staff and parents can go to, and students even, to find out what their options are and to make the most of their non-single occupant vehicle modes. The problem is that role, as it appears in a private sector run building like an office building or a residential building, doesn't have the same, that person doesn't have the same responsibilities, the same features as what ends up happening in real life when this role is assigned to an assistant principal, essentially, so someone on staff at that level who has a bunch of other responsibilities, but also lacks control over certain things. So what we talked about and worked out in this new condition set was a refinement of what really belongs in this person's hands, and we removed things that actually belong in the hands of Kristen, also on this call, that school system-wide transportation planner and coordinator. We incorporate bike parking management into the transportation management plan element, which is consistent with how we have set up our latest, and that's learning through practice with buildings of all types, that it's important that there be an on-site person who considers the management of these facilities as an actual active thing. It's not just that you build it and then it's fine, but you have to make sure it's available. It's not, being used for something that it shouldn't be, and that people are using it appropriately. Standardizing benefit availability across modes. This is essentially where we've, between this bullet and the one below it, tying the benefit budget to the school board approved budget. we took a step back from the more prescriptive approach that our private sector conditions take. And we said, look, the school board is going to set a budget for transit benefits that's going to be system wide. And that budget is going to be used each year to sort of maximize the impact it can have. And so if that budget goes down, then that might impact how Kristen programmatically addresses the modes that need the most support. If that budget goes up, it might give her access to run incentives programs across even more modes. And there might be modes in certain years that become more important than others in order to really boost productivity of those incentives. So the way that it's written in the new language provides more flexibility, but also an opportunity for school team to really partner and think about it as a year-by-year ongoing improvisation and getting better as you go and responding to the needs of the actual occupants of the buildings. And then lastly, and very importantly, we spent a lot of time fixing up how the performance monitoring requirement, which also exists in our standard site plan conditions, but how it aligns with the other data collection that the schools do. And they do a lot, and they do a lot of data collection around, like with regard to safe routes to school, for instance, that has to do with travel. So we really honed in on how the performance monitoring requirement of this condition set would build off of the kinds of data they would already collect and would improve communication and the timing of that kind of data collection so that we're not working at odds with one another and creating extra costs associated with data collection. And actually, before I go on to the next steps, Kristen, did you want to chime in? Is there anything I'm leaving out of this description that you wanted to highlight?
I think you more or less covered it, but I think when I came on board with APS, I think we were looking for a way to kind of systematize this process from soup to nuts. And just in looking through, I think of course Jeff has already alluded to this. We had just so many variations of this condition set, or these conditions applied to the schools, and they were hard to keep track of. So we were grateful to have the opportunity to really come in and look at this with the school lens, understanding, the way that our budget works, understanding how a site transportation coordinator fits into the process when they're not it's not an established job position. It is rather a piece of someone else's multiple roles. And then on the performance monitoring side specifically, being able to use the data that we collect and bring it to bear on improving the outcomes at the schools. And I think, the information that we had collected before, it was almost collecting data for the sake of data collection. And I wanted to be able to actually use it for some decision making, for improvements, for outreach. And my role in APS is relatively new and I guess in some ways kind of unique, but it's really to help promote among other things, transportation demand management, and bring to it an understanding of what that is and how we can, as a school system, contribute to county goals for reducing traffic congestion and spreading out our, transportation demand along the network. So I think this was a good process. And again, we're grateful for staff for working with us. We were going at this, full bore, cooking with gas, as they say, and then everything shut down. So I have to say, I'm also very glad that we were able to pick up the process and are moving it forward now so that come hopefully the beginning of the new year, we can begin then working with staff on some templates that will, again, help to systematize the process, make it easier for our site plan coordinators to understand their roles and responsibilities, and then, for our county staff to come in and look at compliance and, simply be able to help us out.
Great. So next steps. We recently took this similar, pretty streamlined presentation to ACTC and JCTC, so the external and internal joint teams on transportation choice, joint between schools and the county. And we anticipate also taking this to the school's Facilities Advisory Committee. And then ideally, and hopefully this moves ahead without any hiccups through a board application, which will be submitted very soon. And that's an application from the schools to the county. And we're calling it an omnibus amendment because what it would do is it would take all of the existing school use permits and it would essentially describe the removal of whatever existing language is in there. And as we described, it varies from use permit to use permit, but as pertains to TDM and bike parking, and it would replace it with up language to reflect these new sets of conditions. And so they'll prepare in anticipation of a board hearing in December. That's what we're targeting at this point. And as Kristen described, there's plenty to do that goes along with that and after that in terms of implementing it. Most importantly, what we envision is that there will be one master transportation management plan that applies, that is applicable to being implemented at every school. And it would probably have something more along the lines of an addendum that tailors it to each school rather than having them be written with a lot of rewritten to somehow be specific to each school when by and large the schools are operating again in a systematic way and they're providing their benefits in a standardized way. And that brings me to the end of my slides. So I'll click my camera back on if I can find the little camera button. And I'm happy to take questions, comments, whatever you got.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation. If any commissioners have questions or comments, go ahead and use the raise hand, or if you're still somehow missing the raise hand button, and just type into the chat that you have a comment or a question. My only concern looking this through, most of it makes so much sense. I can't imagine what it's been like at APS trying to deal with this patchwork of use permit conditions. My only concern, I think, at this point is with the performance monitoring, the data collection. The commute mode split triennially is great and everything, but I feel like we've used, I believe our office conditions call for things like parking availability at different times of day and occasionally how many trips are actually generated into and out of the site and stuff like that. And that seems like a big loss of data fidelity to forego that kind of information. Can you speak more about why those types of things have been removed from the standard conditions?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about it, and then I'm going to have Kristen talk a little bit about it. We went through a lot of, hair pulling around what would be the most useful set of metrics. One of the challenges at a school site is counts are hard. They're not. It's not the same as a garage where every car going in and out of it, and you can actually capture a certain amount of detail about that. A school has it'll have a driveway entrance, maybe more than one, but it also has pickup drop-off activity that happen off-site. It has parking activity that happens off-site, and people come to the campus sometimes walking a block or two. So we have found it in the schools where we've done actual trip counts, parking counts, that kind of data collection, that there's a lot of there's room for error, and to actually do a really robust count for a school site would cost a whole lot of money for this one-time snapshot that might not give us the return that we need on that information. Another factor that relates to that from sort of my planning side is that what we really want to see is staff routine mode choices changing, and we don't have, like, how to describe it. It's not so much in the TDM team's purview to determine whether, like, the parking on the street should be available to staff or not. That's been a conversation the community's had, and I know it varies from school site to school site, where some it's a quite sensitive issue, others maybe it's not as sensitive, depending on the availability of neighborhood parking and whether having parking occasionally be school related off-site is a problem or not. And so our focus has been on the mode behaviors of the people who are using the school facility, so staff, teachers, parents, and students for, for the schools where the students can actually drive. So we felt like these metrics were actually going to be, especially if they can be collected in a systematic fashion and more frequently over time, then we're not throwing a lot out of pocket, but we're getting trend lines that can help us make decisions about programming. So after all of that noise, I can hand it off to Kristen and see if she's got more to add on that.
Sure. I think, I actually went through, we did 3 studies this year with sort of the standard performance monitoring program. And I had seen a couple before this, and I was just looking at these counts, and they weren't really telling me anything. So what I really wanted was to have data sources that that worked with what we were collecting, but that I could actually turn into something useful that I could act on. To Melissa's point, we, there is a lot of sort of variability in where and how people use our sites and how they access our sites. And one of the things that I did find with one of our reports this past year was, we had a consultant, and they came back and said, well, we know that there's pick up and drop off here, but we've also heard that there's pick up and drop off here, here, and here. And so we were able to capture some of that, but not all of that. So it kind of skews the data in that regard. And there's, as Melissa did say, there's a cost to it. And not being a revenue making entity, it's that's a tough spot to be in. So we are collecting data through our triennial APS Go surveys, which are of students, families, and staff. And students and families are separated only because we actually survey our 11th and 12th graders separately than our families pre-K through 10, because those students now, some of them have driver's licenses. So that too changes things. Which we may not get through a parking count or a traffic count, an understanding of that. And then we also do collect annually on the student side, Safe Routes to School mode distribution data, which can be looked at year over year. And I'd like to be able to take those data sources and, use them systematically. And we've started doing that. And in fact, I'm probably the Safe Routes to Schools data center's biggest pain in the neck, because I go back and I say, okay, this is, I need you to do this for me. I need to look at it this way, which they haven't necessarily been set up to do. But I think we're one of the only school systems that are actually using the data, the entirety of the mode share data to make some action.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Commissioner Clement, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I would like to commend the school board, the APS staff, for this comprehensive reorganization of their TDM. I think it's organization is the first step to getting people to use alternate transportation to school. and I think this is a great start. The only thing I would recommend or suggest perhaps is advertising alternate modes, because the issue came to my mind, has presented itself to me actually as a candidate, because I often petition, or have in the past rather, or distributed literature at various school sites. And I've noticed during those events that numerous parents drop their kids off to school that could otherwise probably choose some other mode of transportation. And so I would just suggest perhaps that as part of a TDM that was fully budgeted, there would be some type of an advertising campaign, either internally in the schools or perhaps at, posting signs at bus stops, that sort of thing, to advertise an alternate means to school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lantelmi, you're up next.
Yeah, and this may be something that no one here, either staff or commissioners, can really fully address or correct. But what I have concern with is tying the TDM programs to the overall budget. It strikes me that this is a way that a TDM program could be killed. Now, I'm not trying to imply that the school board would operate in bad faith and want to get rid of something like this. But I guess this means sort of that if there is a limited budget and TDM money dedicated to TDM get cut back, it would be then cut back pro rata across every school rather than targeting one here, another there, given the individual, what we have now, this school by school criteria. So it may not be anything we could ever address if the school board did decide to do something terrible like that. But is that the way it would work? If the monies get cut back, it then is cut back pro rata across all of the schools, and however that affects the schools, it affects everybody the same way.
So I'll start off, and then I saw Jeff, you and Kristen can talk a little more in detail about what you think the school side of the equation would look like. But as far as the way the condition's written, the only thing, the schools never made, for instance, annual contributions, which is a feature of site plan conditions for the private sector. So that was never a cost. And there isn't anything in the, they will always be obligated to run the program as a whole. So they'll have to budget, they'll have to have staff who are dedicating time, including staff in Kristen's role, whether she's always in this role or it's someone else, to be implementing it. The area where budget was a coordination challenge was the benefits section, which is literally where some of the old language said every teacher at the school who is riding the bus gets $60 a month, or who is, carpooling or something gets $60 a month. And that would be different from school to school. And if the superintendent didn't actually budget it, it wasn't going to happen anyway, in this awkward, we can't enforce that thing. So there was tension there that wasn't healthy in terms of actually realizing the program. So while it is possible the superintendent could zero out a transit benefit budget in a year, and this is where I'll sort of hand off to APS, the good faith that I'm operating under from the county perspective is that they have an APS Go initiative for the whole school that this is building upon, whole school system. And APS Go is predicated on providing transportation options and the schools being willing to provide benefits programs. Now, everything is, at stake when the economy really gets bad and they have to make really difficult budget decisions. But my expectation is that even if they have to shrink the budget, there's still a budget there to work with that we can target more effectively.
Yeah, I think first of all, Kristen's never allowed to leave.
Good.
Because prior to this, it fell on design and construction to have these studies done, and we had no idea which one was which, and we had no central place to keep all of the TDM requirements. So She's not allowed to leave. You hear that, Kristen? Just kidding.
I did.
But I think the other thing that this really does is it does institutionalize it. It makes it one package. So it's one thing that goes in front of the board. And when you put one big thing in front of the board, as you know, it's much more taken seriously than it would be if it was piecemeal around and it's like, well, they get this and they get that, and we don't have to do it here and we don't have to do it there. So I think the thing is it puts one pot of money, and then Kristen in her position can help coordinate how that gets split based on the information that we have and where we need to push or where we think we have the opportunity to get more people to look at alternative modes. So I think it being a one thing and a big picture, I think is going to actually be beneficial based on what we had before Kristen was in her position.
Okay, yeah, this strikes me as overall a great idea, and I commend you for taking on this. I think ultimately it will actually improve compliance, and it will probably save money also. So it's all to the good. I just had, like I said, some questions. I just wanted a little bit of clarity. So thank you very much.
I would also add too that in I think it was 2016 or 2017, the TDM benefit program was opened up to the entire school system. So everyone in the school system, regardless of whether or not there's a use permit at the school, has access to the benefit, which is a small stipend, a small contribution for if you're a transit rider, you ride a bike, you carpool, or you walk. And so we're trying to manage, hand out money as best we can throughout the school system. And we do find that it is a program that our staff likes. And we had, I think last year, 600 to 700 staff people who were taking advantage of it. So our goal is always to, obviously to preserve the funding for the benefit side of it. But as Melissa mentioned, we'll always have a TDM program regardless. So to Ms. Clement's point, advertising, ensuring that we have information and materials, those are things that don't necessarily cost a lot of money, especially because the county often supplies us with all of our brochures and things. So so being able to advertise and promote is certainly something that we will continue to do, whether or not our funding, changes over time for the benefit side of it.
Great. All right, Commissioner Price, I believe you had your hand up next.
Thanks, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, I want to echo the comments made by Commissioner Clement and Commissioner Lantelmi, and just say my thanks. It's a great idea. It's a great initiative. I think you should go forward with it. I think I am a big believer in the effectiveness of TDM programs, and I think this one will have a great effect. I'm slightly concerned because I'm looking at your, I guess it's a chart with all the schools listed. I'm kind of disappointed in two of the schools I care deeply about, both Gunston and Key. Am I to read this correctly that neither of them have TDM or parking, bike parking? Because from my knowledge, Key has some bike parking. They have some, not necessarily great bike parking, but they have something. And I didn't know if that's reflected in this chart that you distributed. But yeah, give me 1 second, I'll let you. But I'm just, like I said, I just want to say thank you. I'm glad you're presenting on this. I'm especially glad you're not before us talking about, building another school with unnecessary roads that you don't need to have as part of a site plan. But please, can you talk a little bit more about the chart that you sent?
Yes, and thank you for asking that question, because I didn't include that in my overview. The chart that you see in front of you has, well, the premise we started with was that we would apply TDM to every existing use permit. There are schools that do not have use permits. They don't operate with a use permit at all yet. Now, they may in the future, and if they do, they would get one of those two TDM sets as soon as they got a use permit for whatever reason they had to get it for. But we chose in this particular board action to not trigger any or try to apply any brand new use permits because they come with all of the other conditions associated with them to schools that don't already have them. So the ones that you see distributed there either had a long TDM before and we're giving them a new long TDM, or they had a short TDM before and we're giving them a long TDM, or they had no TDM before and we're giving them a little TDM. So it's everything that had a use permit. Some of them didn't have any TDM or bike parking prior to this initiative, and they'll go forward with these requirements. But you're right, there are some schools in the system, and I want to say, Kristen, Jeff, do you recall if it's about half a dozen that somewhere, I want to say somewhere between 6 and 8 schools that don't have use permits at all right now.
Yeah, it's essentially the older schools that have had no major renovation. So as soon as they have a major renovation or a rebuild or a whatever, they will require to have use permits, which will have these conditions.
Yep. And just to clarify that header, Gunston and Key do in fact have bike parking. What that header means is that at some point they had a condition that just talked about bike parking or something that we had that said, it was a very, very small TDM element, just simply bike parking in the conditions. Again, with the consistency, this is, I went back and looked through these things and so there's really no condition other than have some bike parking. So Gunston has bike parking. This is my daughter's school, so has bike parking in front of the school and on the side of the school. Now Key, I'm trying to think off the top of my head where their bike parking is, but I want to say it's back near the playground. Okay. No, so there is parking. There is bike parking. It's just, when we took a look at the status of the use permits and or the type of condition that the school had or did not have at one point, bike parking was a type of condition that some of the older schools had. Yep. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I thought that there was no interpretation to this chart. It was just there. So thank you for the explanation. I appreciate it.
Great. Commissioner Buck, you're up next.
Okay. So in my limited experience with safe routes and school transportation, it seems like pickup and drop off takes up a disproportionate amount of, say, a site transportation coordinator's time and attention, and is vitally important for the safety of the kids who are getting there outside of motor vehicles. I didn't see that itemized in the site transportation coordinator responsibilities. Was that intentional? Is that being handled elsewhere, or what's the deal?
Great question. It is handled elsewhere. It has traditionally not been embedded in the TDM program, and pickup and drop off is designed and programmed between a different staff person at the county and the schools when they work on that together. So it's a bit of an artifact of how division of labor in the use permit conditions overall, that it has never lived within the TDM condition. So it may very well be that same person who's coordinating that. It has just not historically been part of the TDM oversight role that this condition outlines.
As long as it's handled somewhere.
Yeah,
awesome.
It is. And a lot of times it falls under the principal. And they have different ways they handle it at different schools. And it's about safety, security, arrival and departure, and how do you monitor that? And then we have other people that are involved in APS that are responsible for the safety and how all of that works and how that training is done every year. So it's completely different. But yeah, it's related but different.
But I guess to the point of how TDM for the student body works, we do try to reduce the number of families who are dropping off through the Safe Routes program, encouraging a lot of walking and biking, and of course, school bus use. So I think that is the component of the TDM that applies to how students are arriving at school, not necessarily operational management of how it works, but.
Great. I had another question just as I looked in a little more detail at some of the individual conditions. Can you speak to how you arrived at the bike parking ratio numbers? One rack for every 10 students for high schools and adults and middle schools and that sort of thing. I only bring it up just because, I have somewhere I read years ago that Washington Lee has like a 25% bike rate or something like that, which, one rack for every 10 doesn't work if one of every 4 kids are biking to school.
That's a great question. I don't have a good answer to it because in the case of schools, I cannot claim it's very scientific. We don't have a big sample, and school bike parking is not one of those things that you can find a lot of data on across the country. We've done much deeper dives and much more analysis of our parking occupancy data when it comes to office bike parking ratios, residential bike parking ratios. I think you guys have seen some of that as we've worked on that over the years. We have attempted to look at schools and find other precedents. And one of the starting points was that the staff ratio and the older student ratio, I guess, for the high schools or whatever, is closer to how an office building ratio would be. So it assumes something like 10% mode share. It does not assume school buildings operate so effectively as the Washington Lee one does. And frankly, they've installed more bike parking over the years because they needed more, and that's great. But we've never been in a position to require of schools or any building lots of bike parking, like lots and lots, in anticipation of really impressive performance. There's more of a middle way we've tried to find. So we created ratios that ratcheted down from that, with lower ones for elementary schools and middle schools being in between.
And I think the other thing is a lot of times maintenance department gets work orders, and we have racks that are installed almost every year or moved if they're not used at one school, so that we can make sure we reuse the resources. But if we notice that there's an issue, the principal notices, they will put in a work order, and we have the racks, we get the racks. It's never a question, and that's where they just kind of show up at some of these schools. And at Washington Liberty, we will be actually adding a whole bunch of bike parking with regard to the Ed Center project. So there's going to be more bike parking in different locations. So I think that's going to be beneficial. But we're always looking for ways to improve it, and how we do that and cover it where we can, and without creating separate structures that end up as a maintenance nightmare. So that's what we're working toward.
And I think we wanted a baseline, but we did, put into the conditions that we will evaluate demand and give ourselves, that opportunity that when we see an increase in demand, then we will add more bike parking. So either through the work process, Jeff, it completely went out of my head. Work order process. Yes. Or, sometimes PTAs request bike parking too. And so they may order some, and then we have our folks install it. So I think we just wanted to at least have a baseline for everybody, and then recognize that there will be places where we'll have more demand based on conditions surrounding the school. So that gives us, a good place to kind of build from rather.
All right, great. Any other commissioner questions or comments? All right, I don't see any. Mr. Best, can you remind me, is this just an information item, or does this require action?
It's an information item.
All right, great. Well, then we can just say thank you very much for coming, and this looks great, and we will see you in the future.
We appreciate the opportunity. I think it's always good to try to make a program actually work rather than just be a requirement. So that's what we're hoping for.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you all. We appreciate the questions and the commentary. It was a good discussion.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Have a great rest of the meeting.
The next item is item number 3. This is the Park Arlington site plan at 1200 North Courthouse Road. And this is a site plan action, so I'll turn it over to the applicant for an overview.
Great. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So good evening. On behalf of the applicant, my name is Kathy Taylor from the law firm of Walsh Colucci. Joining me tonight, I'm just going to introduce our team real quick that's on the line. We have Nick Cummings from my office, Mike Pinkoski and Evan Gittleman from Wells and Associates, as well as Jeff Krebs from VICA. Our team thanks you for the opportunity to come before you tonight and present this application for action. Before beginning the applicant's presentation, I did want to provide a brief reintroduction of the proposal, since it has been some time since we were last here before you all back in February. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this site, which is located at 1200 North Courthouse Road. If you recall, the applicant has owned the property since the 1960s and originally built it as an apartment building, but then subsequently converted it to a hotel use, which you see it as today. So the application before you tonight is a simple request to convert the existing building from its current hotel use to a residential use. Currently, there are 187 hotel rooms, which we will convert to 180 residential condominium units. As previously highlighted, this conversion would ultimately reuse, renovate, and refresh an existing aging building and provide much needed housing at a lower price point that would appeal to a larger pool of buyers. So when we were here last, the primary concerns that we heard related to the excess surface parking, as well as a lack of pedestrian connections. As we'll further elaborate on in our presentation, the applicant has significantly improved the site design to address these concerns. Specifically, we have eliminated a number of parking spaces and have replaced it with landscape beds and enhanced vegetation. And we've also improved the internal pedestrian circulation, as you will see. So the applicant has and continues to work with staff to provide meaningful modifications to the site design, such that staff currently recommends approval. And at the end of our presentation, our team is happy to answer any questions that you all may have, and we would appreciate your favorable consideration in this application. So with that, I will now turn it over to our project's traffic consultant to give a brief presentation. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. This is Mike Pinkoski with Wells and Associates. Hope everybody's doing well. Can everyone see my screen that I'm presenting?
Sure thing.
Okay, great. So, as Kathy mentioned, this is located on 1200 North Courthouse Road. The site is located approximately a quarter mile south of the Courthouse Metro Station. And to the north, it borders 13th Street and then 12th Court North to the south. The existing site, as Kathy mentioned also, is currently constructed with 187 room hotel. It has 3 access points from the street network, one on 12th Court North, one on North Courthouse, and one on 13th Street. And then there are the 2 blue arrows indicate where there's access to the garage. You may remember that the garage does not provide a connection from one level to the next. The North Courthouse is the higher level, and access is the level above. And then when you're on site, you go to the lower of the 2 parking levels. So this is the previously proposed site plan that everybody saw back in February. I will point out just a couple things. The surface spaces that are shown on this plan are generally consistent with what's out there today. You see the 11 spaces along the outer side of the island, and then the 10 spaces along the building in the rear. And we'll show you, I just wanted to show you those because that's part of the main modification to the surface lot. So key concerns from the previous, one-way circulation through the parking lot on the front of the site, excessive surface parking, and then the lack of the pedestrian connections through the site, particularly from Courthouse Road. If you were walking along Courthouse Road, how do you walk along Courthouse Road and get to the front entrance of the building? So the proposed site plan in its current form proposes 128 dwelling units. Access is consistent with existing conditions. You can see the loading zone in the rear of the site, similar to the way the site loads today. We have converted the 2 travel aisles in front of the site to 2-way circulation to improve circulation internally. as well as to and from North Courthouse, or 12th Court North. Here you can see the increased green space that I pointed out on the previous slide that was and is today surface parking. And here's the additional pedestrian connections that have been added since we last met in February. You can see we have a sidewalk connection from North Courthouse Road that kind of stays tight to the building, crosses over the garage access point where it will be a marked crossing there, and then provides access directly to the building. If you were leaving from the main portion of the building and were parking in the parking row immediately adjacent to North Courthouse Road, you now have, or within the island, you can cross under the porte-cochere and then use the sidewalk within the island to access the parking on the opposite side. And it's not transportation related, but I will note also that the outer row of parking along Courthouse Road does have permeable pavers, which it did not have previously. So pedestrian circulation, I did highlight some of the changes along the front of the building. Obviously, there's sidewalks around North Courthouse, 13th Street, 12th Court North, as well as the pedestrian connection in the rear of the building from 13th Street North down to 12th Court North. So the parking, so we're showing here what it is today, what it used to be, and what we're proposing. So today there's roughly 150 spaces on site. The previous proposal had 171 parking spaces and a parking ratio of 0.95. So the current proposal, we've reduced the parking on the surface by 21 spaces in those two areas that I showed you along the rear of the building with the landscape and then in the island, and that brings us down to a parking ratio of 0.83. There's a total of 72 Class 1 bicycle parking spaces and 4 visitor spaces. And that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Is there an additional presentation from staff or just the applicant's presentation today?
Nope. This is Jane Kim from DES Development Services, and I do have a very brief presentation. And I'll actually skip the location. I think we've been over that. I just wanted to point out that there are 3 modifications requested with the site plan application, and that includes the reduced parking ratio, an increase to the percentage of compact spaces, and an increase in the lot coverage than what the zoning ordinance would allow. Staff is in support of all 3 of these modifications. And then I just wanted to point out, for DES, we're looking specifically at the right-of-way and the improvements that private developments generally contribute to that. This project being an adaptive reuse doesn't really change a lot of the existing infrastructure that we have. So most of the existing curb lines and driveways are to remain. And there are some streetscape and sidewalk improvements, but they're generally on the private property side, as you can see, especially with the trees and the plantings along Courthouse Road. There is a large retaining wall that was put in with the VDOT bridge project that the applicant will not be changing. And additionally, there are a lot of underground utilities throughout the site and adjacent that provide a lot of conflicts to changing or improving any of the streetscape elements with this project, since they're not actually building a new building. This is just a summary of some of the key site plan benefits. Even though this isn't a full new building construction project, the applicant has agreed to the majority of the standard conditions that we do require for larger site plan projects, and those include TDM, utility fund contribution. They've committed to some sustainability elements, as well as public art and in-building wireless. And we really have worked, with them since February to get elements such as the permeable pavers, as well as an easement across the back pedestrian path for the neighboring community to have access to. And finally, we staff recommend that the Transportation Commission recommend to adopt the attached site plan amendment. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any commissioners who have questions or comments, please go ahead and raise your hand and I will get to you first come, first serve. But first off, I wanted to ask, Ms. Kim, can you speak to the difference, what the functional difference is with the proposed private easement over that back sidewalk versus what we normally see, which would be like a public access easement over that sort of circulation? What difference might the average person trying to walk down that sidewalk see?
Sure, yeah. The average person will experience no difference. They're not going to be checking to see where you live if you walk upon their sidewalk. I think, and Nick or Kathy can chime in here, but I think it's really a safety issue for the building itself. If they, if it's just people walking through, I don't think they have any issues with that. I think it's for people who may congregate there or create some sort of nuisance or things like that. They want to have the ability to, I think, control that access if they need to. But on a normal day-to-day basis, anyone can walk through the sidewalk as if it had a public access easement. Nick or Kathy, if you guys want to chime in.
Yeah, I'm here. You can see me in my basement. This is my first remote TC, so this is an exciting moment for me too. I think Jane put it pretty well. I think that the easement is really meant for these communities down at the bottom of that hill, and I think what we're doing is providing them the access that they would need to get up and guaranteeing that that's going to be there for them to use. We were concerned about safety. I think that it is kind of an attractive nuisance for some folks who might want to congregate back there or sort of, be lurking or living. And it is much more difficult with a public easement, which would be open at all hours and where we would be going to the police for enforcement rather than us. And I think that really benefits our residents as well as the other residents nearby. From a legal perspective too, the county in Arlington, not in every jurisdiction in Virginia, but in Arlington, when this property eventually gets redeveloped, if we had granted the public access easement, we may be looking at vacating it and paying at a minimum, 50% of fair market value for the land back, and it's a sizable portion of the site. And so I think when we feel like we're accomplishing everything that is intended by granting with the private easement and avoiding some of those other pitfalls, that it was appropriate for the scope of the project, especially too. So.
Thanks. That's extremely helpful. All right. Any other questions or comments from other commissioners? All right, then I just want to say appreciate. Oh no, there we go. Commissioner Buck, always good for a question or a comment.
No, just wanted to say I think I missed the preview presentation a few months ago, but just wanted to thank you for lowering the parking. I know that was definitely something coming in that we wanted. I still think it's too high, but it's it's adaptive reuse. I can't get too mad about it. And the addition of permeable will be good for photo taking opportunities and setting an example for others. So thank you.
We appreciate that. We cut it to the bone, we promise. They are intended as condominiums, so there's a challenge here from a marketability perspective.
All right, Commissioner Lantelmi.
Yes, I agree with Commissioner Buck. Thank you for reducing it. Because this is one, adaptive reuse, and second, a condominium, I'm okay with the parking ratio now. I do have a question about the sidewalks that are tied up against the building. There's improvements there from last time. People can actually now walk to courthouse streets, courthouse road without having to cross parking lots. So I think that's a great improvement. Could you call up the consultant slide that had the point to where the new sidewalks are? Because I have a question about the one on the north, what looks like on the north side. You can find that. There was one where you actually were highlighting the walkways.
Yeah.
Yes, this one, increased pedestrian connection. The one along 13th Street North, that's angled, is that in yellow? Is that all a new sidewalk that was not there before? I was on mute.
Yeah, so what it is there is like a, I guess there is a sidewalk in that area, but that will be the rear access point for individual units along there, as well as being a sidewalk to walk down to those units and provide access.
Okay, because it looks like it dead ends rather than connecting up to 13th Street. So, but if it in fact is really or access to individual ground level units, that's different, and I don't have a concern about that.
Yeah, Commissioner Lantelmi, and if you look at street view, you can kind of see where that sidewalk exists today, and that there's a pretty serious grade change between where it ends right now and trying to connect to 13th Street North. That would be a bit challenging. The same thing jumped out at me when that slide first went up.
Okay, thank you. That answers my questions.
Commissioner Raddick?
I think my question was answered. They mentioned it being condominiums. I wasn't sure. Nick talked about it being redeveloped, but if it's condos, I don't imagine it's going to be redeveloped at any point in the near future.
You never know. You'll see eventually over time in the next decade or so, some of the older condominium buildings in the county may be redeveloping, and in my business, we always just think ahead in that respect.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say there's a condo building in Alexandria that I think is redeveloping as we speak. Commissioner Price.
I just want to also say thank you to the presentation from both staff as well as from the applicant, because I know how much grief I think I gave them at the last meeting based on the extensive amount of parking that are available. And it just seems like a really missed opportunity given how close you are to the metro. But now knowing the full picture, we completely understand, appreciate it. Thank you for taking the flack and for coming back and giving us I'm going to say a halfway decent proposal. I appreciate it.
All righty. Yeah, as I was about to start saying when people started raising their hands, thanks for the presentation. Definitely an improvement from the last time we saw it. And it's nice to see some adaptive reuse and, maybe the possibility of condos that are at a somewhat lower price point because of it. With that said, does anybody want to jump on a motion before I can get myself in the right spot for that?
I'll move to accept. What's the language here?
I'll second.
All right, so that was a motion to recommend approval as per the county manager's recommendation.
Yes.
Is that what I heard?
That's what you heard. I just got to the page. Sorry.
Perfect. Any discussion of the motion as proposed and seconded? All right, then I will go through one by one, and I will probably miss some people because some people came in after I made this list. But Commissioner Clement, how do you vote on the motion?
Yes.
Commissioner Yeri.
Aye.
Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Buck, I didn't hear you. How do you vote on that?
I didn't hear you ask. Yes. Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye, yes.
Commissioner Brose.
Aye.
Commissioner Price.
Aye.
And I will vote aye. Commissioner Raddick.
Aye.
And Commissioner Rich.
Aye.
Did any other commissioners join that I have missed in my list? All right, then that is unanimous. And that will conclude that item for us.
Great, thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our next item is item 4, other business. The only thing that staff has, our next meeting is October 29th, and that will technically be the November meeting. So it would be in Teams format, 7:30 p.m.
Great. I did want to put out, I have been, they are re-examining some portions of the Clarendon sector plan as a result of a number of development submissions that are submitted or expected, particularly on the western end of Clarendon and the Silver Diner area. And they are looking for a transportation commission representative in that process. And I'm going to be honest, I have my hands in way too many pots right now. So no need to jump in now, but if that is something that interests you, please shoot me an email and express that interest so I can get back to them with a name. Commissioner Lantelmi.
I'm not jumping in for Clarendon, but I do want to pass along that, as the chair mentioned earlier, the Art Bus maintenance facility is moving forward, and a PFRC will be scheduled for that. It looks like right now it may be in December for the first PFRC for the Art Bus maintenance facility. That's down in Green Valley, right off of Shirlington Road, between Shirlington Road and 395. The buses right now are being stored there, and they actually back up to the fence between 395 and the site. There's Cube Smart around it. It's a fairly industrial area, but there is definite community interest in this and how this is done. So anybody who's, we will obviously need to have a Transportation Commission representative on that. I'm chairing it right now, so just wanted to pass that along, that will be coming up.
Awesome,
Chairman,
thank you.
can I just preempt Commissioner Buck, because I know he has his hand up before me. Being that you kindly appointed me to the Transit Advisory Commission or Committee, they asked me to be on this PFRC, and I juggled some things, and yes, I can do this. So I don't know if I can serve in a dual role in this capacity, both for the commission as well as for TAC. And I guess I'm asking more of a question.
It's good to know that you'll be on there, but I would love to have a dedicated Transportation Commission member if somebody else is available. So that'll give a little extra backup, there.
Sounds good. No, I'm just saying I'm offering it in case you don't have anyone. So that's all.
Appreciate it, Commissioner Buck.
I am absolutely not volunteering for anything else. I wanted to just give a quick update on 3 items that I am working on. One is there's 2 site plans in Crystal City that are on the same block, and there's a revision of the block plan that's preceding those site plans and SPRCs. It's rather complicated. You'll see it referred to as Block M in Crystal City. There's some transportation-related issues with the revision of that block plan. There was an LRPC meeting to review those. The transportation issues, if you want more details, please let me know. But the crux of it is the applicant is looking for relief from the Build 2 lines for a new segment of Clark Bell Street, which is one of the north-south streets that the sector plan calls for development to provide. They're looking for relief from the Build 2 requirements, which has some unknown implications for running of the Metroway, which it's part of the Metroway corridor. There's also implications of whether or not they can comply with the bike element of the master plan. There's also some issues with some revisions to the continuity of the Crystal City Underground. I have not heard what the status is of the LRPC block plan amendment, whether or not the LRPC is going to be dealing with that, and will it be passed on to site plans, or are they going to try and resolve this with the developer? I haven't heard, so that's kind of an unknown. Second thing is the Pentagon City planning study. They just released a kind of a transportation history document updating travel trends for the past few years. And I believe DES has been leading a transportation simulation creation of what's called a VISA model to model current and forecasted traffic levels in support of what will be kind of a land use study, studying how much more density can be added to Pentagon City. I forget, I've lost track if I'm representing Transportation Commission or the Civic Association on that. Transportation Commission, I think. That has just kicked off, and you'll be seeing your emails clogged with public meeting notices. If you have any questions or feedback on that, feel free to hit my email. And finally, Chairman Slatt and myself are both on a stakeholder committee with VDOT dealing with JBG Smith and National Landing Bid's proposal to lower Route 1 to grade at 2 intersections going through Crystal City. VDOT is doing a engineering feasibility and traffic study of the potential of doing that. It still seems somewhat uncertain, the scope of that study, of whether they will be looking at other alternatives. I'm also involved with the community in trying to generate other alternatives that might provide some alternatives for pedestrian and bicycle connectivity through the area. And that's about it for me.
Great. Thank you for the update, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Raddick, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm willing to help with the Clarendon thing. I forget what you called, what the title was, the land use plan update, or but throwing my hat in.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Commissioner Yeri, I see your hand up.
Yep. Just have a really brief Vision Zero update since that process is moving back along. There was actually a virtual public meeting for that tonight, but more importantly-ish, county staff just completed a big old analysis of crash reports and put together their crash network map. And they are in the process of collecting more online feedback, trying to get a sense of what your experiences are like, just trying to move around Arlington. So if folks would like to, I can get that link out to Chairman Slatt if you want to distribute it. And if folks want to share that within their networks and far and wide to help get more feedback there, that would be tremendous.
Yeah, please. Staff has done some really fantastic work on this. They've got what they call their high injury network map that kind of looks at streets that represent a disproportionately high number of fatality injury crashes in Arlington, and some hotspot mapping and a lot of other really good work. Hopefully it'll be the basis of a lot of great changes going forward. So definitely check those out. We'll definitely get the link out to the commission. And then Commissioner Lantelmi, I'm not sure if your hand is back up or if it never got lowered again in the first place.
It never got lowered.
Okay. All right. Anything else for the good of the commission? All right. This was one of our more fast meetings. Everybody, please enjoy the rest of your evening. And we will be back for our November meeting before you know it.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Great. Stay safe out there.
Take care.
Have a good night, everybody.
Take care.